he had some, I believe, last minute work transition come up, so he won't be able to join today. But we'll give everyone a couple minutes to jump on, and then we can go ahead and get started. Has everyone on the call filled out the survey for when they can do the use of force training? Of course, the people on time will have done the survey. Zucky, how's your fasting going? We're in the midst of Ramadan, so he's probably feeling
so far so good. SJREC, how about you?
It's good, man. Final stretch.
I need to connect with you. Maybe I'll do it after this.
Yeah, definitely. I go to Abu Bakr regularly for Friday, Jummah.
Oh, that's where you come?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this Friday, let's meet.
Yeah, we can reach out. We can figure something out for sure. Connie's hanging out at the Golden Gate, making us jealous.
I never take the call on my iPhone, and I'm sitting here thinking, oh, there might be features here that I don't know. Because you don't get everything when you're on a phone versus the computer. My new computer of 30 days, somehow I did an internal busting up of the screen. So it's back at the max door.
Oh, no.
Not good.
Not good.
Yeah.
Well, we are right about at 5 minutes from start time. So why don't we just go ahead and get started for today, and then people can kind of trickle in as they will. Want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we can do a quick roll call to get us all started off here. So I'll just go through the list. So myself, I am present. I see Monique is joining, so we can count her as present as well. Commissioner Todd.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Nisi.
Here.
Commissioner Collins. Commissioner Burnett.
Here.
Commissioner Wells. Commissioner Hinson. He sent the message saying he wasn't going to be able to make it. Commissioner Nelson. And Commissioner Unwer. It's raising his hand. We'll count it. And Major Harold reached out to myself, Mindy, and Monique before the call today. She is not going to be attending today, but we thought it was fine because we didn't have any prepared questions for her. So if we do have any questions from her as we go through the review, we can, as always, send it out to her, and she's pretty good about responding. One quick update, she did send out the neighboring community statistics to us, their reports today. I think she's still waiting back on Chambly because their accreditation officer is on vacation. And she said they're probably the most comparable to Brookhaven in terms of demographics and size and everything like that. But she was able to get everything for Roswell, Dunwoody, and Sandy Springs. She mentioned that she never really got a response from Norcross, so she wasn't able to get any of the data from them. So we haven't had, it's been a busy work day. I haven't had a second to upload it to Basecamp, but I'll go ahead and get those reports up to Basecamp after this call, and we can take a look at them and maybe discuss them in the next session. So in terms of the agenda, and speaking of Basecamp, so most of today's discussion is going to be around the complaint data and getting everyone's thoughts after you've had a chance to review. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review the assignments that I sent out and the year that was assigned to them. Before we get into that, just to confirm, has everyone been able to log into Basecamp and use it successfully? Okay. And then in terms of use of force training, Mindy, were we able to get any more responses before today's call?
Let me pull it up. Well, Connie just said that she responded to it, so maybe that's one more.
Oh, you're calling me out, Mindy, for doing
Sorry.
it 15 minutes ago.
I was trying to answer his question.
Yeah.
I should have just said yes.
Connie just did it 18 minutes ago.
Well, I was looking, I was like, who are we missing? Bad facilitation on my part.
Commissioner Burnett's fessing up and said he only did it 20 minutes ago. So he
At
beat
least
you by
it was.
5
At least
minutes.
it wasn't 18 minutes ago.
Thank you for
No,
your
I'm not
support,
dead last. I'm
Davis.
good. Thank you, Connie, for covering me. I greatly appreciate that. Yes.
Okay,
My
so we have
pleasure.
a response from you, Davis. You filled it out, I don't know, a few weeks ago.
Oh, did I fill it out a few weeks ago?
You did.
This is what happens when you own a small business and you're like managing, cleaner, staff, coach, trainer. Yeah, all those things. Yes, this is what occurs. So
Well, maybe
So-
your vote will count twice then.
yeah.
Yeah, we have two folks who went twice. So I have to look deeper at the individual responses, but it looks like Saturday, May 22nd is the most popular.
Of course, that was like the
Unfortunately,
one
there
thing.
wasn't a single date that worked for everyone.
So why don't we just go ahead and call it Saturday, May 22nd? That wasn't actually a date that I had selected, but it's okay. I'll move some stuff around on my calendar to accommodate it. And that way I'll go ahead and communicate it back to Major Harrell and Lieutenant Snively so that we can get it on the books, confirm timings. Again, I think it was something like a 12 to 3, or sorry, a 10 a.m. to a 2 to 3 p.m. commitment. With
I
a
think it
couple
was
hours.
9 to 3.
9 to 3. Okay.
Mhm.
And so
And
go ahead.
are you sending an invite to us, or should we all hold our own calendar?
Happy to hold it on y'all's calendar and see if either Lieutenant Snively or Major Harrell sends something. I'll send out a hold tonight.
Thanks, Mindy. And I think we'll have to send out an
Detail.
official invite with the details and everything anyways. And we're going to make the training portion of it, the Zoom link, we were going to make it available to the rest of the commission as well, based on the commission meeting last time. So we'll need to get those details with them. So we'll work on ironing it out and get back to you, but I'm glad that we have a date selected. Okay, cool. So now I don't know if we have all the years represented here, but I didn't think the specific year was as important as everyone kind of digging into it to kind of understand the processes that are in place when complaints come in, right? The years were a convenient way to split up the analysis of it. So does anyone have any initial thoughts after you reviewed the procedures and the data around how you feel we're handling police complaints?
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
I can't see everyone in terms of whether I'm butting in inappropriately. So hold me true to not intentionally doing that. You know, my questions were a little further qualification, like some of the quality of the write-ups seemed a little insufficient. And so I'm wondering, did they just kind of cut and paste and pull a little bit of the information or what? Because it left me wondering. The other piece that I noticed was not on any of my write-ups, and I had 2018, was the race. There was no race component on the part of the complainant, the officer, or the suspects. And I would say for our committee, that might be important information to know in order to establish whether there are patterns evident or not.
There
So I
was,
didn't know-
so I noticed the first one and the second one too, Connie, because in some cases it went into details about like what the investigation was, right? So one example was that actually has both of those things. It was like African-American complainant complained against an African-American officer saying that they were racially profiling people on Buford Highway and pulling them over. And that we did an investigation using the cameras and came to the conclusion that there was no way for the officer to be able to tell the race of the complainant before they got to the car itself, right? And things like that. And then other situations, it was very brief in terms of, somebody complained that the officer was being rude. It was found to be unfounded and then moved on to the next one. So there was definitely a little bit of details missing in some areas and details included in others. And I wonder if that comes down to the person writing the report too.
Hey,
With-
so it's Monique here. Just to piggyback on Connie's point, I noticed it as well. I get why race may have felt relevant to the reporter on the example that you brought up in 2018, but some of the ones in 2017 where race is not inherently relevant to, a complaint that the officer may have taken their money. I think it was like the officer came to a call and there was some money missing, and they reviewed the footage, and there was no time for the officer to be able to do that. But if you have like a report that's inconclusive, or the word, I'm sorry, I'm driving and I don't have it right in front of me, or they're exonerated, to see
Unfounded,
that,
yeah.
hey, unfounded, to see that, hey, a lot of the ones, regardless of what the incident is, that are unfounded happen to have Black complainants would be relevant for this committee, regardless if there was a inherent racial component to the complaint being made, if that makes any sense. And so for purposes of this committee, that was one of the things that I noticed as well, that I would think, it would be important. It seemed like race was only mentioned when that was kind of the basis of the component.
Yeah.
Connie, did you have any other observations? Those were two good ones.
No, because I couldn't, to me, that those are relevant, as Monique just said, in some of them, you can sort of tell based on the write-up that it may not matter, but there are many that I think it could matter. And so that's where I was going. I don't know if we can request it. So two things came up for me. One, it made me wonder about race and ethnicity on several of the 2018 ones. Also made me wonder about, especially when they say supervisor reviewed body camera footage and found it to be unfounded or what have you. Based on what they said before, it just seems like there would be a little more substance to the write-up. And then my last point that I think we may be responsible for is when they talked about after the review, the investigator arrives at one of 5 conclusions, and one of them might be about policy and or training deficiencies, or they may identify department policies, training and practices that need to be reevaluated. I would hope, and I don't know, who reviewed the let's say 2020 report, but if race and ethnicity is not a part of that, that would certainly be a recommendation for a requirement, because it's in some cases it's not really helpful to not have it. So I don't know if we can go back and request it, fairly reasonably quickly or not, but I would love to have it.
I mean, we can certainly request it. The question is do they even collect it?
Right.
Because I was looking, and I was just kind of scrolling through it while you were talking, just kind of looking at their standard operating procedures that Lieutenant Sibley has shared with us. And they don't in there mention what type of data they collect, just that this is how it's documented and that this is what the steps are, right? In terms of the review and what the individual officer versus supervisor and what IA is responsible for and stuff like that.
Yeah. So if for example, 21 out of the 38 complaints in 2018 were either unfounded or exonerated, if there may be a story there, a narrative that is worth looking at. And even if it's not, a faulty narrative, it would be, I would think, valid information for them to be able to clarify or qualify that they're doing a great job, because race is not a negative component. So
I agree with that. I think that was very similar for 2016, where a large majority of the claims were found to be unfounded, right? What I did notice is that there were, in 2016 at least, I think 2 or 3 incidents where officers were actually let go for inappropriate behavior. That was, and I was, you know, on kind of the opposite side of the coin, I was pretty happy to see that, because to me it showed that, you know, it's not maybe perfect in terms of the reporting, but that BPD is willing to take action, right? And especially like the complaints that came in, one was a police officer refusing to write a police report on a narcotics case in Oglethorpe University. And then there was a suicide attempt or something like that where they were refusing to write a police report. And in both cases, the officers were investigated by internal affairs and terminated at the end of the day. And so that was something that I thought was pretty interesting to see, right? Because I think that's the common narrative sometimes is that a police officer can get away with anything without having any sort of negative consequences. So if we see that as far back as 2016 to 2020, we see some of those things happening, at least that gives an indication of what the culture is like inside of the police department, right? And there are things that are not tolerated.
And in 2019, there was 1 or 2 also.
Cool. One thing I noticed, and I don't, and maybe your experience, Davis, can kind of help us here too, to kind of think about what makes the most sense. So, I mean, obviously this data isn't public at all, right? And we had to request it. So I think it's clear recommendation that there needs to be more transparency around it. And I think Lieutenant Snively was pretty open to that. But also there's no independent review that ever happens, right? It's all within the Brookhaven Police Department and handled within the Brookhaven Police Department. And one thing I was thinking about is there an opportunity to have an independent review of these sorts of things? Maybe not for every incident, right? But maybe on a yearly or a biannual basis or something like that. And if there's other departments around the nation that I know have started to bring in like citizen boards and stuff like that as stakeholders in the police department's operations, and if this is something that would be appropriate for that situation.
Yeah, you know, I would be interested to know how that would work, like a yearly review, because what really are they going to review in October of something that happened in February? They're not really going to change the outcome of the investigation, I don't think. And it's just so difficult. You know, there is something to be said. And first, I want you guys to hear my heart. I am a huge proponent for having police reform. There has to be a change in the way that policies are created, policies are enacted. I am very proud to have read that an officer was let go in 2017 and hearing about 16 in 2020 for things that in my life would have either gotten you a write-up or you would have been allowed to resign for, so that they did not have to report you were fired for something like that, right? Because it looks bad on them. You know, it can look bad if one of their officers violates a policy so bad he has to get fired. So what they do is they allow them to resign, and then they just unfound the report. That's what happens in the first metropolitan area I worked in. And then, by the way, those officers are then, because they haven't been fired, executed, terminated from a job, they're able to go on and work in other police agencies where their very bad decision-making skills can carry on. And that is a lot of, you know, things that we've seen in the past, or things that we're seeing on YouTube and on body cams. A lot of those people that are doing things that are questionable or just outright wrong, a lot of those people are second and third chance people. You know what I mean? Like second and third chance officers, because of what's happened in the past. So I'm proud that Brookhaven PD does that. A citizen review board, there is something to be said for. It's hard to describe without sounding, I'm not trying to be flippant when I say, if you don't know, you haven't been there, then you can't know. But there's something to be said for being the officer who goes to the same house 10 times in 6 months, right? For the same call, the same outcome. And then the lady calls and says, Officer Davis stole the $300 from me. Officer Davis would, he's never done that. Body cam shows I didn't have enough time. Right. And so that's why some of those write-ups, I think, Connie, are super small, because my guess is some of those complainants also are return complainants. Right. Some of them are people who got tickets that called, and there's a game that it gets played by the public. I shouldn't say by the public. It's very few who do it, but there's a game that gets played where if I make the right complaint, they'll throw the ticket or the charge away. And that's also been like I've lived that more than once. And, then no justice is served on anybody. It's just it's just a way around what should have happened. And everybody walks away at the end of the day, supposedly okay, no harm, no foul. But really, if, it's really a septic system at that point. And I'm not saying that's happening in Brookhaven. It does not appear to be like that. But that's where
even if
complaints.
there should be some way to qualify that and
Oh,
to
yeah.
track that. Because that's an assumption no different than, a flip side assumption. So the point is it equitable? Is it fair? Is it
Right.
just? Is it? And so if in fact that's the story, and I believe that sometimes it could be,
Oh, yeah.
there should be some tracking mechanism that would identify that and
Yeah.
again, qualify or have a quality enough write-up that, there's clarity in the fact that is happening,
Yeah.
and when we talk about transparency, especially for our committee, we would need to know that, because if in fact that's not qualified, and there's something that happened that seemed believable or what have you, to me, that's a good thing for the officer too, to have a little more, what's the word? Clarity in patterns, which is why I do
Mhm.
believe that having the race component and other pieces, or having some consistency in even the way that you write it up. Maybe, hell, that's a button you click to say, this is the 6th time. Because on the flip side, Davis, I got to tell you, one of my other questions is, how often are officers written up? When I look at 2018,
That's a great question. Yeah.
when I look at 2018 and I look at 38 write-ups or complaints, are 13 of them by the same 2 officers?
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? I'm
Yeah.
looking for
Yeah.
patterns. That's sort of how I work.
That's a fantastic point. And by the way, you'll find that when you'll find the trouble guys that get complained on sometimes. And then you'll find the ones that are just bad seeds that haven't fouled up enough to get gone. And I fully agree with you. That's kind of the data I would like to see is, is it the same type of complaint 7 months later on the same officer? Because then you're going to have to look at that and say, there has, 2 different people, 7 months apart, almost the exact same words being talked about or whatever. And it's no secret, body cams aren't 100% perfect. They can reach up there, cover them. You can take your hand and make a noise with them. They're getting better, but there's always something that can be said for what happens outside the lines of the camera. And I would be interested to know, I'd be more interested in, is it the same officers in those write-ups year after year than the race component? But I do believe the race component, I agree with you that it is important when it comes to the transparency of the department, right? Because I think Brookhaven is doing so many things well. BPD is doing so many things well. I would love for them to show that the problem is not, or the imagined problem sometimes isn't, or if it is, that they're going to do something extremely positive to fix it.
And that was kind of my thought behind the maybe review board is the wrong answer, but like engagement board or community stakeholders that they meet with regularly, right? Just because it's like, if we can start getting that data, if they can start collecting it, and then just having a place where they can go to and it's kind of scheduled where people who aren't necessarily out to get them, right? It's not like the people on there would have malintent or anything, right? But are actual community stakeholders, maybe faith leaders that BPD has connections with and stuff like that, to come in and say, okay, given the data, do we see a pattern? Right? Or do we see something that broke down? Like there was one complaint in 2016 where the complainant called because the officer destroyed marijuana. I guess it was their marijuana, and the officer destroyed it, and they were unhappy about that for whatever reason. And that was a clear violation of policy. And there were 2 supervisors who knew that this happened who didn't report anything, right? And then the only reason it got caught was because there was a complaint, and internal affairs took over the investigation due to the type of complaint that it was, which is when the supervisors acknowledged. So there's some breakdown in that, right? Where there was a violation of policy and the supervisors knew about the violation of policy and didn't do anything about it, and IA had to come in to force action. Like, those are the types of conversations that could happen in an annual review to figure out, is there something that's actually broken here that needs to be amended, right?
So
Yeah.
sure. So as far as the citizen review board, to the point that they happen so far after the time. So what can be done? Again, as a suggestion, they usually the reflection is more of a policy change or a practice change, not necessarily to fix it or fix whatever wrong they deemed. And so I think there's always time to do what's right. It's no different than what we're doing here now, looking over 3-4 years worth of data. What can we do about a particular wrong in 2016? Nothing but draw inferences and hope that our recommendations lead to better policies. My other point on the race data, again, the race of the complainant being important because it also shows who's comfortable or who has confidence in the system enough to make reports. If we're learning that our citizens of color hardly ever call in, hardly ever make complaints, maybe there's something about that process. Is it that they've never been apprised of this being recourse, a potential for recourse? Is it because they don't have faith in the system that if they call that anyone will ever look into it? Is it that they have called and those calls or those complaints don't end up in a report? And so again, seeing that data lets us kind of understand what's going on with the nature of that. And then my third point, final one, was I am not sure what it is, back to the citizen review board, whatever you call them. I think that's the catchphrase we're using right now. But doesn't Commissioner Funny also sit on some a board or something for the Brookhaven police, in a citizen? Well, I'm sure it's probably in his capacity as a commissioner, but he did say he was staying on that. So I don't know exactly what that, maybe a foundation board or something along those lines, but I still thought that it was very interesting that the data we're getting now is data that they, did not publish or regularly have. So clearly no one is asking for it. So just a bunch of thoughts for the notes, and we can consider, again, what our recommendations are around those main thoughts that I have.
So just good. First of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you for handling the business of the committee. I was just listening in from afar and I heard my name, but you guys are doing a superb job. Thank you for your hard work.
Glad I wasn't talking bad about you. I didn't know you were here.
I know.
And I'm off camera, so you talk me. I'm glad we're on our best behavior.
You guys are doing an awesome job. So just to let you know, so there's a foundation called the Brookhaven Police Department Foundation, and I'm on that board. And the purpose for that foundation is to raise monies to support police officers that may have a tragic health issue, not only for themselves, but for family members. We help pay for certain medical expenses for the family members and officers. We also provide scholarships for the policemen and family members to go to college. So those are some things that we do. We support the department with purchasing their police dogs. I forgot the proper name, Davis. They're police dogs, so we've purchased those for them. So those are the things we do to help the department. We've actually, when the city started, between Friends of Brookhaven and members of the board of the foundation actually bought AEDs for every police car. So things to help the department do a better job and to help the officers. That's what that foundation has been created for. So each year we typically have a golf tournament to help fund it. Board members give contributions to the pot. And we did have a gala, I think one year we did have a gala to raise funds also. So that just gives you an idea of what we do as as the Brookhaven Police Department Foundation.
Okay, so that's there's no opportunity for review or oversight there. So that makes
No,
makes
ma'am.
perfect sense. I just was making sure that it wasn't something that was already going on and
Sure.
wanted to follow up. So thank you for that.
Sure, no problem.
So
Does anyone else have any? I know there were a couple of folks that did 2017 with me, and they sent emails regarding their impressions on some of the data. And so I know a few of us have kind of spoken up about what we've had, but I was wondering if anybody else had any comments about their data.
yeah, I was just about to call out Janice and Zeki, because we've done all the talking here and you guys have just kind of been listening in. What are your thoughts about this?
This is Zaki, and I was assigned the 2019, and a couple of things that stood out for me was the two categories here. Just kind of bringing up the numbers. You know, under the category of types of allegation, there is inappropriate contact and rudeness. And they contributed to about 47% of the total issues. And my thoughts were because, you know, you can have different perspectives on rudeness. You can have different perspectives on inappropriate contact sometimes, especially in a multicultural city like Brookhaven, because different backgrounds lead to different behaviors. And sometimes not everybody will be able to understand and associate with those behaviors. So it's sometimes important to learn and appreciate the differences. And not that I found anything to call out within those, but maybe as a suggestion moving forward for the police department, I think it may probably help in the long run, kind of helping them understand some of the aspects of cultural propriety that certain cultures may have on contact, what is inappropriate and what is appropriate contact. And, you know, especially in terms of rudeness, because certain cultures may look at rudeness differently than other cultures. So maybe that is an aspect that we can look at. And another area that I was, you know, kind of found interesting here was, I was looking at a study because I come from a data background, and, you know, data, especially when it comes to machine learning, data analytics. I was reading a study that was done in Australia where machine learning analysis was employed to understand some of the behavioral patterns in the police department. And what it demonstrated was that prior instances of serious misconduct were particularly predictive of certain serious misconduct that took place later. And that misconduct was mostly prominent during their mid-career, and secondary employment and performance issues were important predictors, while demographic variables typically outperformed the compliant variables. So there's a lot of technology and tools that can be used to maybe better understand this data, because when you have a lot of text, again, it is, you know, it's a lot of interpretation. So maybe we can use a lot of the data points here to do the data analytics and also start doing some machine learning to predict the future behaviors, so the police can actually tailor the training accordingly.
Could you share that article on Basecamp, Seki?
Yeah.
Because that seems like it would be super interesting. So they, in their analysis, found that early career smaller mistakes led to predictability of larger issues that would pop up during mid-career. Is that correct? Was that the correct conclusion?
Yeah, it basically says that, the misconduct was most prominent during their mid-career. And, their past behavior was a very good indicator of future behavior. That's what machine learning actually does. And they were able to pick up a lot of these issues and tailor the training. I think we can certainly take certain lessons from there and see if you can tailor trainings to certain officers based on their past behaviors.
Yeah, and that hints at the repeat offender problem that Davis was bringing up too. But it seems like there's a little bit more to it, where in Davis's example, the repeat offenders were always having serious issues, right? Which is why they were asked to resign or done a write-up. Whereas this study found that there might be smaller issues early on that could predict bad behavior later.
Yeah. And so, Zaki, straight up, like, there's people in my career that you turn around and you go, how do they keep a job? Like, how are they still here? Or, why is that guy like that? And then you find out later they're the ones that have done some, egregious violation of ethics or civil rights even. And, and you can normally, a lot of times you can see a pattern. You are, it's not something that I would concentrate on, I guess, but I would love to see that article, because that is very interesting about particular training for particular people. And it's not that they're bad people. They just stub their toes a lot of times. And then, but later, and it's funny, mid-career, that's when I shouldn't say most, that's when a lot of police officers, they kind of cross the line from being empathetic to the public to almost hating their life, because they've been, and it happens to patrolmen because they're seeing the same thing, right? The names and the faces change, but the day doesn't. And it makes for a sour attitude. And when you don't care, when you've lost empathy, then you will make, I'm not even gonna call it a mistake. You start to make really bad decisions. And I believe going back and looking at it, you would find that those people were the same ones that made smaller, less horrific decisions or bad ideas. And you could have identified it, or, you could have at least seen that storm on the horizon, so to speak.
Yeah, Dave is just kind of going back. I think all of these anecdotal evidences kind of point when you enlarge the sample size and tie it back to a bigger sample. I think that goes on to prove. That's why I think using a lot of these data technologies nowadays really helps a lot in tailoring, finding issues, and even because when you see a lot of text, you don't get to the crux of what the problem is. And that's why, again, coming from a technology background, I would use a lot of NLPTs and all of the other text processing to see what the issues are and how the officers are actually writing these notes.
Zaki, I love where you went with the intercultural intelligence component, that what works for one, let's say culture, religion, race, whatever, may or may not be okay. And I think what we have to recognize is that most of the policies, procedures, and even behaviors are rooted in white supremacy. That's a fact. It just is what it is. And so we've got to start there. And so we have over, the last however many years, I mean, the police, quite frankly, was created to track down slaves that escaped. So let's start with that generational impact on both the trauma to police officers who could actually do that, and over the years what it's become, which is what Davis is saying. Look at what they look at and see day in and day out. And then there's also trauma on the other side, especially for Black people. But the intercultural intelligence, I think, is really a key point. And so we've grown to normalize what should and shouldn't happen based on a white lens. And I don't know that that's appropriate anymore, So we've got to also consider that when we decide that this is the norm, based on what, So loving the data analytics, if we can, although sometimes it scares me because, what are we feeding into, what's the data we're feeding in to get data out on the opposite end? And if the data in the beginning wasn't clean, I guess, for lack of a better term, data, then what do we get as output?
Completely agree, Connie. I think, as you're saying, data garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
That's what I was just
You know.
going to say. Garbage in,
So-
garbage out. And it also hints to what Monique was saying too, of, if there's people of certain backgrounds who aren't even willing to call the police department to file a complaint, then you never even get the data, right? So that's interesting. Janice and Kathy, I see you joined as well. Welcome to the meeting. So do you have any thoughts about any of this?
Well, I would say one good thing, at least the number of complaints decreased from 16 through 19, In 16, there were 71, and in 2019, it went down to 37. So that's an improvement, And to the point of the rudeness, I did 2019, and it seems like most of them were considered, they were dismissed or unfounded. And I just wonder sometimes about the, how would you call it? The, whoever's looking at the body cam and what they're calling rude and what, like Zaki was saying, what some people call rude, maybe to the certain police officers is not rude, but I wonder how objective that is.
Yeah, kind of the eye of the beholder, Jen?
Yeah. And it seemed like in a lot of the cases, the body camera was what really determined the outcome. And I guess that can be good and bad from what Davis was saying, that the body camera doesn't always show everything. And I think that's true.
Well, and there were a couple occasions, I believe, in 2016 even, where it was not sustained, meaning there wasn't enough evidence because the body camera video was blocked or the microphone was off. And so that particular officer was, I don't know what it means to have a record of discussion. Maybe Davis can enlighten us, but then it's like there's a record of discussion that they were informed that this was bad behavior or something, but led to no conclusion whatsoever, right? So you can't even tell if it was subjective in that case.
Yeah.
Great point, Janice. And I love how you looked at the amount of cases across the years.
Yeah, we're improving, I guess. Yeah. And I have one question for one of the officers, when you can ask it. Why don't police officers try to just shoot somebody? Well, if they have to shoot somebody, why do they always shoot to kill? I mean, why not shoot him in a leg or an arm just to slow him down instead of shoot to kill? I mean, that doesn't seem quite right to me. Maybe they can answer that better or explain that.
Maybe that's a question for our training when we're there,
Yeah.
to get the official answer. I've heard the practice answer from law enforcement officers regarding their own personal safety and how anything less than aiming for the largest center of mass and all of that stuff doesn't prevent a person from continuing whatever harm caused them to draw their weapon in the first place. So I think that is the answer that we've received often to that question. But of course it's asked over and over again, and I know Davis may have something to say, and I hate that he's on this commission like the rest of us, and I don't want to tout him as our resident expert, unintended. But I know that that's been the response that I've received over and over from law enforcement in different areas of life.
Yeah.
So he shook his head no, so it doesn't seem like he has much more to add to that. I don't see.
And we have one last person whose opinion we haven't heard yet, Monique, which is Kathy.
Okay.
So Kathy, would you like to weigh in on the conversation? We cannot hear you.
Yeah.
Maybe having some
Um,
audio issues because I saw she was trying to come in and off of mute.
Okay. And I still see a hand up too. Zaki's hand is up. I don't know if you intend to take it down.
Yeah, just want to pick up on Janice's point about the cameras not being on. I don't know if it's a standard procedure to only switch it on at a certain amount of time, and the basis of that standard procedure, was it a cost issue because you're recording at a constant rate, and now that technology is becoming so cheap, like even at homes people record 24 hours. The cost of recording has gone down. So could that be an option where police, will they be open to keeping it on anytime they set off on, go out on their duties? So there's really that extra piece of evidence that is always available.
My guess is, Zaki, that they already have because of that, right? It's gotten cheaper. Back in my day, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the cameras we had really weren't at the department. What few we had, they were not great. They did not record audio for anything because it wasn't an external mic. It was all one unit. So running or fighting with somebody was just garbled white noise, right? But you didn't turn on all the time because the storage device was so small. Whereas now you're, on these tiny little chips. And I think it's probably changed to where anytime they get out of the car, it pops on, simply because I've interacted with Gwinnett County now twice, where my business is, and both times, I just ask, "Are you guys recording?" And one of them just said, "Man, we record nonstop. If we're out of the car, we're recording." And I said, "Man, I love it." And he said, "Do you?" And I told him, my history, and we had that conversation. It can be, I would like, there can be some subjectivity to it. However, the body cams tend to help an officer in a complaint situation far more than hurt. And they're always great to have when somebody fouls up really bad, good guy or bad guy, or officer or, citizen. And I think that's what we're heading towards, just as standard. Like now they come with, some of them probably even have triggers. If they haven't, they're coming, where it will trigger as soon as you get out of the car, right? Like until you get home and take it off, if you're out of the car, it's triggered, it's on. And, something like that has to be coming. And I think it's just a great idea. I think every police officer from the 90s hated them. We thought they were a horrific idea. And then we become accustomed to them and realize the benefit of the camera, because it's so hard in a complaint. It's so hard to sit in front of a supervisor and try to explain yourself and say, "I wasn't rude," right? I was quick with that person, like, "Hey, move your car out of the roadway." And it could sound like being rude when really you have 30 other things happening. Well, when they look at the camera, which is the next closest thing to them standing there, you can pick up a little bit more of not just my black and white words that I wrote on the paper of the report, but the emotion that was going on in the moment with both the officer and the citizens around. And so there's great benefit. And you are right, as technology gets better, we're going to record longer. And there is no downside to having cameras on police officers. None, zero downside, in my opinion. So love it.
Sounds like that'd be a good follow-up as a question of just to understand, what is the storage capacity of BPD. Kathy just said out in chat, do not have audio or camera. I feel that police departments should not be allowed to police themselves relative to complaints. So coming back to that theme of an external group of some form.
Oh, she does not have audio. I was like, the cameras don't have audio, but she's saying she didn't have audio. Thank you, Kathy, for that. Yeah, and I think, there are morale issues, obviously, that come in when folks feel like everything they do is subject to scrutiny and review. I get that a lot in my personal professional life, and then especially with the cameras, or you have these folks who are not there, who are not police officers, looking at this, and what do they think is rude versus what a supervisor would think is rude. But again, I do think that it may not be, maybe the give or the rub is not every single complaint that comes in goes to some external party, because at some point those people are going to become a part of some system, right? But really that annual review that happens, that can look for trends, that can look for issues with particular demographics, that can see that's not necessarily doesn't necessarily lend itself to impacting morale negatively, but just letting folks know that, hey, this is, you're still a public servant. You don't have the luxury of no one questioning, or the public not being able to review what you do. I don't know.
So just a quick
Okay.
time check. We have 7 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we don't go over and respect everyone's evening plans. So I think we have quite a number of questions, and Mindy, I want to make sure that your question comes out to the forefront too here, which you posted in chat, which is, what are the hiring policies for BPD, and what do they look like, and how much are they looking at previous complaints and using that in decision making? So I think that's a really good question for us to take back to BPD as well and ask them about. Is relevant. But any other thoughts or questions? I mean, we always come out of these sessions with more questions than conclusions, but I think that's natural given the state of where we're at right now, right? Which is kind of data gathering and understanding, moving into community engagement. So are there any other questions or thoughts you guys have about the complaint data that we reviewed over the past couple of weeks, or the policies?
I just didn't understand a couple of terms. I don't know what CAD and CID mean. Maybe Monique knows.
You were in 17 with me, Jenna.
Yeah. Do you know what they
I
mean?
don't even. I must have skipped over it if I didn't.
There's a capital in caps, CAD and CID. I don't know what.
Trying to see what the context was, because I must have felt comfortable that I knew what it was.
She wasn't in 17, so that might have been in 16. What
This
you had?
This is in 19.
Okay,
This-
2019.
Okay.
The CAD report stated that the call was received at blah, blah.
Probably that stands for computer aided dispatch. In other words, notes from the computer, the official login is probably what that is.
Okay, then what's CID?
If you read, can you read it in the sentence for me?
Oh, let me see. Let me find that.
I don't see it in 17.
Here's one. The officer did not advise anyone in CID or anyone of authority about the incident.
Criminal Investigative Division. They're detectives.
Oh,
Is
okay.
probably that's what it sounds like. So if the complaint was something like a large theft, like say it was $3,000 stolen out of a vehicle, the officer might not have. That's definitely a felony. So it might be policy that they would have to notify an investigator with the Criminal Investigation Division. I'm assuming that Major Harold could speak absolutely with clarity, but that's what that sounds like, is their detective division.
Okay. And I guess the watch commander.
Mandy just put it up there. So.
And the watch commander, I guess he's the one who looks at the body cameras.
Yeah.
All right.
It probably starts with first line supervisor and then goes up. A watch commander would be a captain or lieutenant.
Okay.
Your comment, Kathy, I'm gonna try to in the chat. Let's see. What do you think about the George Floyd policing federal policy, which tracks a police record, but who tracks or records behaviors of the officers? What do you think about the George Floyd
can't explain it.
So this is, I think, about looking at the macro of how the police department is doing versus the micro of individual police officers who may have repeated offenses. Is how I'm interpreting the question.
Exactly.
Kind of hear Kathy coming in
You
in the
kind of
back
hear
a
me
little
coming
bit.
in,
Well,
Monique? You hear me?
yeah,
Yeah.
just a little bit. That you got? Are you
Yes,
there?
that's
Yes.
me.
Oh,
I'm here. I'm
okay.
here. Okay, I've been working on this. I'm sorry, y'all.
No
I'm not in
problem.
a position to do this, and I'm no techie queen. Okay, so I'm getting it together. I have quite a few questions about policing. First, I want to apologize that I'm not going to be taking the training. I don't prefer to do that. That's just not in my heart to do. And I'm going to listen to y'all when y'all come back, and y'all can teach me everything you learned. Secondly, when I was reading those complaints, I have complained to before Brookhaven, it was DeKalb County Police, and I followed up with my complaint. And it was definitely profiling, and I was in an area, and it was not well. It didn't have, the lighting wasn't great, and so I kind of like slowed down. There was a guy in the car with me. The police stopped us, and we said, "Well, why did you stop us?" And they said, "You were in a drug infested area. People sell drugs here." And I was like, "Okay, but we didn't know that." Okay, so then he goes on and asked for, well, I wasn't driving, I was the passenger. He asked for both of our IDs. I give him my ID, and he tells me that I'm from Linwood Park. So he says that, oh, so you are from a drug impacted area. And so, I was adamant about complaining about it. And I think the rudeness of police, it definitely comes through with African Americans and brown people. It comes through. It's a whole different kind of policing that's done. And when I read the complaints, I wonder who these complaints are from, because it really is, it's a problem. And if police, who do you call when the police is doing something wrong? Like in George Floyd's case, they saw the police doing something wrong. Well, who do you call? The police are doing wrong. So those are the kind of questions I have when I was reading that. That was all. Thank y'all for listening. I'm glad I could say hi to y'all.
No, I think it's a valid point, and we keep coming back to the point of rudeness and the subjectivity of it and how that's applied. And I keep thinking about Monique's statement about who even complains, because I've personally been in a situation. I was pulled over many years ago once and accused of blowing past a bus who was picking up students, when in fact my neighborhood was in front of where the bus was. And I sat there for 30 minutes with the officer who had no proof that I did anything wrong. He looked at my license. I offered to take him to my house. I said, look at the address. You can see where it is. He said, how do I know you're telling the truth? Maybe you moved recently, and so you're just trying to get out of this. And after 30 minutes of just sitting there, he had to let me go. He had no choice, right? But I was 22, 23 years old, long hair, long beard, and a hoodie, in a beat up car, looking a certain way, right? So it certainly felt like profiling. But because of who I was, I didn't even call in the complaint to Sandy Springs, because I said, no one's going to take me seriously about this, right? And I'm late to work. And that's more of a top priority. So I think this is just a common theme I'm hearing across everybody here. Is just what is this rudeness aspect, and how are we really making sure that the officers are being held accountable in those situations, and that people are feeling comfortable. So I think that is in our last, now that we're over a minute, so I lied to everyone about ending on time, apologies. But that's something that I think would be great for our community engagement, right? And really starting to, as we reach out to people in the community, starting to see how comfortable are people with raising complaints, irrespective of what the BPD data tells us. How comfortable is everyone raising complaints to BPD when they see something go down?
Yeah. 'Cause it's interesting that it's declining, especially in this climate. So maybe folks are just less inclined to complain, and you'll see what that means. Or everyone's doing a great job and there's nothing to complain about.
Right.
So for our next meeting, SJREC and I will develop an agenda based off of where we are in the process. So this first process part of our plan, I think Mindy will have to get me right here because I'm not looking at the our continuum, or however we're supposed to do this. So we were supposed to be at the policy review stage, and I think now, as SJREC has been mentioning, we're going into the community engagement phase, and so maybe how we're able to guide our next meetings in line with where we are as a commission moving towards that. So we'll develop an agenda based on that. We will send out the follow-up questions from today once we get our minutes to Major Harrell and to Spivey to see, what feedback they can offer us, and we'll make sure that information gets put in base camp, and then we will get ready for our next meeting. And then the new data, we'll kind of try to make some assignments of this new data so that when we come to the next meeting, we would have already reviewed it.
One question I had for the group was, so our next meeting is scheduled for May 19th, and now we've agreed to do the use of force training on the 22nd. Would it make sense to push a week so we have the training done and that can be part of the meeting as well? Or would we prefer to keep it on the 19th and then do the training on the 22nd and come back 2 weeks after the 19th?
What's the date of the big commission meeting? I don't have that right in front of me.
20th. So it's the day after our scheduled meeting.
Yeah, it will be before our use of force training still. So,
Yeah.
So I think I think to push it would be better. We would, if we're reporting at the meeting, we'll report about the training that's coming up and what we've done to date as a committee. And we've had 2 meetings since the last commission meeting, I believe. So there'll be plenty to discuss in our 2 minutes that we get to discuss it.
So why don't we plan to have our next meeting 3 weeks from today on May 26th then, and we can send something out on Basecamp to make sure that everyone who wasn't able to attend, but that'll make everyone's life easier too, because then that's only 1 commission meeting that week rather than 2. And we'll have a lot of juicy stuff.
What I'm not certain on, and I would want to hear everyone's feedback, is whether, because once we do that, then will we be moving out all of our meetings then, 2 weeks from there and kind of jack up anything that anyone has going forward? Or do we take this next meeting off and pick up kind of according to the current schedule? And I'm fine either way, but I know that, everyone may already have like this standing 2 weeks from whenever we started versus now adjusting that will bump all the meetings down a week. So I don't know if we skip the meeting and maybe just disseminate information and meet virtually, or do we, then change our meeting schedule off of pushing this meeting out?
That's a good point, Monique. We could honestly use the use of force training as the sub-in for the meeting that week, and then just pick it up on the regular schedule so that it stays the way it is on everyone's calendars.
I would advocate for that, just for consistency.
Is that something everyone is comfortable with?
Yeah,
Yes, that's a great idea.
sounds good.
Let's do that.
Did we decide we're canceling the next meeting? Was that?
Yes, we'll
Okay.
use the use of force training as the sub-in for the commission meeting, and then we'll pick it back up at the regularly scheduled time, which is June 2nd, which I think, and Monique and Mindy and I will get together and make sure we have a good agenda, because then we'll get into the data gathering portion as well.
Yeah. And we'll probably just pay attention to Basecamp as much as you can, and we'll try to get some conversations going there as well, so you don't miss us too much. You don't miss us.
One more last question from Davis for BPD. Perfect. So this is about understanding what kind of training they're giving on cultural differences and how often that training actually happens, because you'll forget if you do it once 10 years ago.
Well, and I think that question there about the cultural customs kind of goes back to that rudeness, where maybe there are things that are seen as being unacceptable culturally, and are we being trained on that? In my point of rewording his question, but definitely we'll put that to our liaisons. If you don't see the question in the chat, does the department currently have training on how to interact with different ethnicities that are a part of Brookhaven as a whole? Simple classes about customs and courtesies spread throughout the year or revisit a couple hours a year. All right. Thank you so much for that, David.
Okay, with that, I think unless anyone has anything to add, we are good to adjourn.
Absolutely. Thank you. Are we
Okay.
moving?
Thank
Did we
you.
move? We
Thank
don't need
you.
motion to adjourn. Okay. Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
guys.
Have a great
Have a
Thank you.
great evening, everyone. Thank you. Bye.